Welcome to the second episode of Brainy Recovery, sponsored by Sylvania. It's a resource for understanding how our mind, body, emotions, and spirit each play a distinct role and collectively work together for providing long-term and sustained recovery. Hi, I'm Dr. Susie Wiet. I am a psychiatrist, addiction doc, and traumatologist who wants recovery for everyone because I know that that's possible. Before we get started, know that even though I am a psychiatrist, I am not your psychiatrist. And listening to and learning from this video does not mean that this may be a substitution for treatment that you actually may need. So in this episode, we'll be learning about how to make conscious choices that shape and lead us to a path of long-term and sustained recovery. Now, in the last episode, which was our debut episode, we defined what recovery means, which is simply a process of change toward health, wellness, and really living our deep authenticity. And we also identified that all of us are in recovery from one thing or another, and that the very first step of recovery is simply awareness, bringing things to awareness. Maybe you chose to practice the NBA exercise on awareness. That is, notice, be honest, and ask yourself. Ask yourself if you are okay with maintaining the status quo, or that you now realize that your narrative or a pattern of behavior or a life circumstance really does need to change. And it needs to change to be healthier. Now, let's get into the topic of why conscious awareness is critical for taking that first step into sustained recovery. To drive home this point, let's first talk about the weather. The weather, Susie? Yes, the weather, because it's a potent analogy or potent representation that I've used for about 20 some years in addiction treatment with my patients. And it's to help them understand how to get from unconscious to conscious states of behavior simply by understanding our emotional regulation, simply by practicing regulating emotions. And that's a psychobabble term, emotional regulation. So here's the analogy. The weather comes and goes, and it's constantly changing. And it responds to all the pressure zones around us. If we don't pay attention to the weather outside and the temperature drops by 90 degrees and I'm dressed for summer, I go outside, I'm going to have a natural consequence because I ignored or avoided the reality of what has changed. Or perhaps I noticed the weather outside and I see it's a thunderstorm and I had a picnic planned and I still said, screw that weather system. I'm going to the top of the mountain and have my picnic. Well, I'm going to have a natural consequence of getting dumped on by the rain or possibly a lightning strike. Now, that is an example of being obstinate, being resistant to acknowledging the reality and staying stuck in the storm. But if we raise our awareness about what's going on in the weather outside and it's constantly changing, we are then giving ourselves the chance to make a decision. If I want to consciously choose to either grab an umbrella, dance in the rain, take shelter, or maybe just watch a really beautiful sunset and invite someone who I love to do that. Now, the same is true with our emotions. If we avoid our internal weather and we hide from or stay stuck in an emotional storm and just keep making it bigger, our age-old narrative is also predictably going to come up in that weather system. And our weather system is the pressure zones that are being put upon us from the exterior and sometimes from the interior too. Now, if I don't pay attention to my own weather system, my own emotions that are coming through, I will have natural consequences because of the subsequent reactions or actions that I choose. and sometimes at a very unconscious level. However, if I simply raise my emotions to awareness, my narratives, my age-old narratives to awareness, then I can choose very effectively the behavior response that brings us towards more health, wellness, and authenticity. Now, by allowing awareness to surface to a very conscious state, we can use that energy to fuel change and behavior towards a healthier path. When we do this, we are living simply in our needs. When we don't do this, we are living in our wants. Plain and simple, our needs versus our wants. When we're living in our needs, we're living in health. When we're living in our wants, we're predictably living in something that's a more unhealthy state. We will be going into a lot more detail about this in other videos because it's so essential for long-term and sustained recovery from anything in our life. Now, let me give you an example of how to sort out our wants from our needs. So here's my little scenario. A client of mine may come into my office and may be speaking to me in a way that I feel is very disruptive to my own internal emotional weather. It may produce feelings inside of me of feeling disrespected, dismissed, or rejected, perhaps. Or maybe a self-narrative comes up in my mind that somehow I'm worthless or I'm not good enough. And this now is a situation that is unconsciously reminding me of age-old stuff, of perhaps when my dad treated me with a lot of disrespect and demeaned me. My unconscious and predictable default then, again, an unconscious and predictable default pattern is to feel really angry if someone is demeaning me and disrespecting me. Just like anyone else, I'll get angry. Now, that anger, which is just a feeling, that anger could result in the following responses. And I'm going to give you four responses that it could result in, and there are plenty more that it could result in as well. So with that anger, I could pick up a chair and throw it at my patient, which is not a good idea. And I'm giving into a want for power. I could start screaming at that client, and that's also not a good idea, and that's a want for power. I could leave the room and maybe go down to the bar and drink or go shoot up heroin, also not a good idea, and that's a want for avoidance of the conflict. Or I could state to my client that I'm noticing that their tone of voice seems to be disrespectful or dismissive. And when I kindly bring that to their attention, I may find out that they have no idea that they're behaving in that way or stating things in that way because they just stubbed their toe. So then we can clear it up really quickly. Or maybe I find out that they had something that they needed to talk with me about and didn't know how to bring it up from the last session. And now we get to dialogue about that, and we get to a place of resolving the emotions, resolving the energy all around that emotional state that they were experiencing and I subsequently experienced too because of the emotional weather going through both of our weather fronts. So resolution or emotional regulation, that psychobabble term, occurs simply by consciously choosing an effective behavior that is in alignment with something that is of health. Now, when we're meeting our needs, and our needs then start to transform our state, that emotional weather, we are allowing resolution to happen, and we're also allowing ourselves to grow, and we're living more and more in our health rather than reacting in our wants, which simply transfers emotions into more chaos, more stagnation, or more unhealthy behaviors with those other examples. throwing a chair, screaming at someone, or going down to the bar, shooting up heroin. Those are not effective choices. They're not meeting our needs. No one needs to go have a drink. No one needs to be screaming. No one needs to be throwing things and being violent. So when we're choosing our needs, we're choosing our health. When we are then exercising our brain in the process actually of recovery, instead of sticking in our age-old narrative, our status quo, that unconscious and predictably unhealthy response. When we're practicing living in our needs, we eventually find ourselves celebrating recovery because we start to grow and grow and grow in our potential, even if it requires that we make a difficult choice or take that path less traveled. And what's super cool, and we'll talk about this more in later videos, is the more we practice our needs, it feels so good that eventually our needs take over our wants because we don't want to give that up. Now, when we're living in our needs, we're rehabbing, reconditioning, and we're exercising a really important part of our brain called the reward pathway. Well, actually, every part of our brain is really healthy. It's really important. And this reward pathway is a super highway in our brain that has the job of simply reinforcing an action that's important. And we'll have more detail on this in subsequent videos too. So by consciously selecting a healthier choice, we are training our brain to default into the reward pathway, and we start using our brain for powers of good that are led by our needs. That conscious choice, in turn, literally starts influencing the health of our mind, the health of our body, the health of our emotions, and the health of our spirit. The brain's capacity to heal is so amazing, and that means your brain too. If my brain could be fixed, so can yours. So I wonder, what conscious choice can you make today that is based in your needs, not driven by your wants from your unconscious emotions or in an age-old narrative? What conscious choice can you make for your needs, for something that's of health? And I encourage you to write down that narrative passage, that negative message to self, those negative emotions that pop up and are related to an ineffective behavior that may be looping and looping in your mind and driving chaos or driving dysfunction or driving things that are unhealthy. Then ask yourself, what do I need to do with this? What do I need to do with this bowl of emotions or this bowl of narrative, rather than what your default response has always been? What conscious choice can you make today to shift your brain a bit further on your path of recovery and start exercising that really important reward pathway in the healthy way? Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found meaning in Brainy Recovery, a resource for understanding how our mind, body, emotions, and spirit each play a role and work together for long-term and sustained recovery. Please like, share, and subscribe and receive notifications of my latest episodes. Blessings to you. Bye-bye.